Is this gonna become a regular show now? I mean, after the success of the last Apple Sheep Reacts to, all you guys just want me to react to things. Really? We're just gonna do the Fine Bros round? All right, just, okay. Now, before we begin, we'll be watching Unbox Therapy's video about don't buy the iPhone 10. And I want to remind people, after a lot of comments and a lot of hate I got on the Apple Sheep Reacts to Samsung Galaxy Growing Up ad. There was a lot of recurring comments and a lot of recurring thoughts that kept popping up, so I want to address some of those. Several times in that video, I tried to emphasize the fact that I like Samsung and the ad makes sense. It is just very, very biased, and I don't think it really changes anyone's opinion. It just reaffirms people who already hated Apple even more. And that I think there's better ways you can advertise Samsung, but all the comments were still, oh my god, so salty. Oh, you mad, bro? I'm not mad. I'm making the videos you guys ask for. Constantly, I was getting comments saying, react to the Growing Up ad. So I did. And then everyone was like mad that I even tried to defend it. It's like, okay, once again, with this video, I am also getting it heavily requested. So keep that in mind. And also keep in mind going into this, I like Unbox Therapy. I think he's a perfectly good tech YouTuber. He definitely caters to his audience well, which I think favors finding the best deal on most of the smartphones that are available. And while I disagree with him on a lot of things, and likely I do in this video, as you guys expect, that doesn't mean we have to hate each other. This is differentiating opinions, and I absolutely encourage the ability to respectfully debate other people who have thoughts and beliefs that may not be yours. I'm totally into that as long as we can be respectful towards each other. This is not me hating on him. This is not me calling him out and saying he's a terrible person. This is literally just me responding with my thoughts on his thoughts.
It's time to make a very highly anticipated video, because a little while back, I made a video called Switching to the iPhone 10. And you probably noticed that in front of me, there's an iPhone 10 right here.
Now, this is something that is kind of popular with him, you know, just stating the obvious. There is an iPhone 10, yes. But this is something I kind of predicted going into this video, is the fact that earlier he had made videos explaining that he was going to switch his daily driver to the iPhone 10 because so many people buy it, so many people are excited for it. He's going to give you his true thoughts. But to me, this kind of discredits your opinion on other phones because it sounds like, so you don't make every phone you review like your main phone that you use exclusively. So we're getting like your partially used opinion of a phone while you have another phone as your daily driver. So I don't understand why this is supposed to be surprising. I feel like if you're reviewing a phone, you should be using that phone. At least that's what I do. But I think it's obvious that a guy who's used to Android, who's using a bunch of different Android phones, is going to treat iOS differently because that's what he's accustomed to. He's not reviewing the iPhone 10 and all of its exclusive external hardware like the Apple Watch and the AirPods. He's just using the iPhone 10, but I imagine if he's using Android phones all the time in his regular tech life, then the iPhone 10 is not going to fit well into his pre-existing, very, very diverse ecosystem. That's why I don't really see the point of saying, I'm going to switch to the iPhone 10 exclusively. It's like, it's not gonna fit very well. If you're accustomed to having different Android phones, you're used to that. Most phones that come out are Android phones, so if you're accustomed to that, then the iPhone 10 obviously is going to do things differently and you're not gonna be used to that. Anyway, he continues.
When a new smartphone comes in here, I don't always switch over to it exclusively. I don't always put my SIM card into that device. But you see, this device here, this is a flagship. This gets a lot of attention. The notch, the lack of the home button, the lack of the fingerprint scanner.
What I'd like to point out is that I find this obviously biased from the start, if that you're mentioning a phone review by starting off with all of its major flaws. So of course, I don't think he's bringing up the notch in good light. See, I actually like the notch. I would consider that a nice thing, but a lot of people don't, and I'm sure he doesn't like it either. But he immediately goes to lack of home button, lack of headphone jack and stuff like that, as in like, here are all the major weaknesses. And I noticed this with a lot of tech YouTubers. Typically, when you start the intro to a review of an Android smartphone, you talk about some of its exciting new features. But when you start off with reviewing an iPhone, you have to say, there are no perfect phones. It's not perfect. There's definitely flaws with this phone. And again, I have nothing wrong with being biased. As you know, I am very openly biased. I just wish people would be more open about it. Like when you're a tech reviewer and I think that you clearly have some bias against a certain brand, just be open about it. I'm fine with that opinion. Just be obvious and be upfront. That's what I try to do. I have an extreme bias towards Apple. There's no denying that. I'm not trying to convince you I'm unbiased. Whereas channels like this, they're not terribly open about that.
So because of that, I had to make an effort to really invest myself into it so I could give you guys the type of feedback that might help you determine whether or not this phone is for you. I do want to let you know that there is no perfect smartphone. No single smartphone that is the best smartphone for absolutely everyone.
This is a common point brought up in a lot of arguments, that perfection doesn't exist. This can go for tech, this can go for food, this can go for cars. It's just, to me, it makes you seem smart, but it's kind of granted. I wish people would start pointing that out. You know, it's not perfect. We get it. Nothing's perfect. That's fine. This is technology. This is computers. There's always going to be problems. I just feel like when reviewing Apple products, you tend to bring that up more obviously.
All right, the iPhone. First of all, I'm happy Apple was ambitious. They said, hey, it's time to finally do something different. Now, it's not just because they thought it would be fun to do so. It's because the marketplace has been pushing in that direction.
What a big shock. Apple decided to make a move that the market was interested in, not just because they thought it would be fun. Why are we treating companies like this? Obviously, the decisions they make are to cater to the mass market. I don't know why. I feel like there's a lot of fluff in these videos. Anyway.
We've had shrinking bezels from almost every major
except the Razer phone, except the Google Pixel, except that weird fold-out phone.
Competitor in the smartphone space. We want more screen. We don't want bigger phones. Anytime you're making a change, you're taking a risk. You get rid of the home button, you're gonna have some users that are like, but wait, I liked it. Your quick settings moving up to the top right corner, that had to be utilized for this new home gesture, let's call it, which also acts as the multitasking gesture. I think a lot of...
Okay, so he brings up that gestures are different and people like the home button or people like where Control Center was. I wish people would keep in mind that Apple did provide those options. The iPhone X was not the sole phone that came out this year. Two very, very capable phones with a lot of exclusive features that the Android competitors don't have. The iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, which I know aren't extremely popular. Not everyone wanted that, but it's because the people who wanted the 10 like the gestures. They like where Control Center is. That doesn't bother them. Apple provided more options than just the 10. And of course, the user still has the option to simply not buy the 10. And also the iPhone 7 is still selling incredibly well, especially because it received a price reduction. So I would just like to make the point that I think Apple does provide options. If you want Touch ID, if you want a home button, they still provided 2 brand new smartphones this year that still support that. So still, keeping that in mind.
I think a lot of what's being talked about from an interface perspective feels a little bit disjointed. A lot of that comes from your preconceived notions of how you're going to interact with the device. You expect things to work a certain way, and then when they don't work that way, it's going to take a while to adjust. The face unlock, it works. But the process...
Before he gets into Face ID, I wanted to comment about that. What I don't understand the point of is saying that I'm proud of Apple for being ambitious, as in, yes, people were tired of the same old design. The 6, the 7, the 8, they all look very similar. I think it's because it's a design that works and people clearly kept buying them every year, so we were fine with that form factor. But of course, he just credited Apple for making great changes. However, at the same time saying that people are going to be upset that things change. It's like, well, yeah. If you wanted changes to a smartphone, then yeah, the UI is gonna change as well. And I have to say from experience that everyone I know who bought the iPhone X prefers the gestures and is starting to try to use gestures on their iPad or other Android phones. It's actually faster. They're okay with it because, as I mentioned in my review, gestures allow for input variables to not take up place on the display or the front of the device at all. So now you can still have apps, you can have videos playing, you can have your home screen layout go edge to edge without having dedicated space just for a virtual home button or a physical home button. On Android phones, you have to have the 3 buttons on the bottom. Those take up space. If you're watching a video, you have to swipe them up to activate them. Whereas if you're gesture controlled, it means that you still have a complete control over what's going on the device without taking up visual space. I think this is better, but he's of course just bringing out that this has changed. This isn't what people are used to. Well, we're used to the same design for 4 years. We wanted something new. If you don't want something new, buy the iPhone 8. Anyway, moving into the Face ID topic, which I'd love to address.
Not something that I consider to be enjoyable. And it's something that I speculated might come up for me when I saw the original keynote.
Is as easy as looking at it and swiping up. And, you know, let's try that again. Ho, ho, ho.
Okay, so that Face ID fail that he loves to bring up, he did a whole video on that got very, very popular. Yes, it was bad planning on Apple's part, but it was not a failure of Face ID itself. It was a failure of setting up the keynote correctly. What had happened was, if you didn't know, the crew came out on stage, and while they were setting up the demo phone, they triggered the Face ID sensor several times, and because they were not Craig, they decided to lock. If someone who is not the rightful owner of the phone tries to activate the phone too many times with their face, it will lock. It acted exactly as performed. Apple issued a statement about this. I never really saw a follow-up on it by Unbox Therapy. He just kind of said, yeah, it messed up on stage. See, Face ID fails. It's taking literally one example and letting it represent the entire feature, which I think is unfair. It's totally fair to say that Apple screwed up in the keynote setup process. They should have planned that better. But luckily, if everyone remembers, Craig had a backup iPhone 10 that worked perfectly fine several times in the keynote right after that failure. But of course, they don't bring that up. It'd be like me saying that one Pixel 2 that someone on Reddit got that didn't have the operating system installed in it. This is an absolutely true story. If you look it up, one user bought a Google Pixel 2 XL and it did not have Android installed on it. It's like saying that that incident resembles all of the Google Pixel 2. It means that all of the Pixel 2s are bad. All of them could potentially not have the OS on them. That's not true. Don't let a single isolated incident reflect the entire product line. But anyway.
Reach over and quickly unlock it, and my glasses are off, and my hat is off, and it'll miss. All right? Now with the fingerprint scanner, that doesn't happen.
I do understand that Face ID does not work all the time, but I simply have to disagree with my experience. And I think what part of this is he's used to testing Android phones, which of course all of them still have the fingerprint reader. So he's accustomed to that working because he's had it for so many years that when that fails, you know, your mind's not going to record that memory. It's like, oh, my hand was sweaty, or I had to pick up my phone, it was uncomfortable. Whereas if you're looking at it from a perspective of someone like me, Touch ID has never worked. Fingerprints are always changing, so this wasn't working for me. So I've had extreme failure with Touch ID, and lots of people who have commented on Face ID have brought that up as well. There are plenty of instances in which Touch ID is more inconvenient. And again, if you so desperately want Touch ID on your iPhone, get the iPhone 8.
Strange way that you interact with it. This almost like bowing to your phone. You adjust, there's a little bit of that. Sometimes there's a little bit of an adjustment here. Even when you get the little unlock there, you're not done. It's an unlock and then it's a swipe up. It's a two-step.
That's correct. It's because iOS users like to have a lock screen. We like to very quickly look at our notifications, either respond to them or ignore them, and then let the phone turn itself off. And yes, surprisingly, for Face ID to work, it has to be pointed at you. I know that's shocking, but I also find that more convenient than having to reach out and touch the phone. He's saying, yes, you have to bow to your phone, but at the same time, Touch ID, you have to pick it up to access it on the back for those devices. And of course, you have to be holding the device. You have to be touching the fingerprint reader. Yeah, surprisingly, to use a unlocking feature, you have to interact with the phone. I know, it's crazy. Anyway.
Two-step process. I'm a fan of technology, so I like that progression. But then all of a sudden, I picked up the OnePlus 5T, and it was like, blam! I have it over here. I point it towards you. Nada. Bam! It's a thing. It's just using the front-facing camera. You see that right?
I know a lot of people love to compare the 5T sensor to the iPhone 10. And one thing I'd like to point out is it's great that they have options, but the 5T face unlock feature is essentially saying that you don't need a home screen anymore. And a lot of the methods the 5T uses is simply by not having animations. I think Apple's about style and they like having animations like the swiping up and the apps coming in. 5T was always about speed. So if you're into that, that's great, but it's basically saying goodbye to the lock screen, meaning every time I would pick up the 5T, it would instantly go to the home screen and maybe I just wanted to see the notifications. Whereas now that I'm on the home screen, I have to swipe down to see the notifications and respond to them. I would find that an extra step. I like my lock screen. I don't need it to instantly jump to the home screen at every given chance. And also he talks a lot about how 5T is faster with face unlock. It's using far less sensors, which I'm sure you've heard about. And they even talked about this in the 5T keynote. It cannot be used by third-party apps. It cannot be used by banks or anything to unlock. And I think that Face ID is useful because it is applicable to so many more applications. It works with Apple Pay. You can access your passwords in iCloud Keychain. You can unlock passwords for banking information with Face ID, which is incredibly smooth. Whereas Face Unlock for the 5T, because it's just with the front-facing camera, it's not using those IR sensors, it's not as secure. It's using 100 points of data rather than 30,000, and they were even open about that. They said for certain apps and for the third-party stuff, you're gonna need to use the fingerprint reader. And a lot of iOS users simply don't want to have to pick up their phone and reach to the back of it to activate Touch ID. I think that's why Apple was against putting it on the back. My most common scenario is I'm sitting at my desk and I have this wireless charging stand that works really well. I put my phone there and when I need to access it, I tap it. It's already mounted at me. It unlocks with Face ID. I can check notifications, and if I need to open the phone, I can just swipe up. If I had to use Touch ID on the back for everything, I would have to pick it up off of its charger, or if it's sitting down at a table, I have to pick it up and reach around and hold it. I get it. It's a personal preference thing, but I'm just saying Lou's experience is exclusively with a ton of of Android phones that he tests throughout the year, so switching obviously to a totally different ecosystem and only using one product from that ecosystem, you're not gonna be used to it. It's gonna feel different for him.
There, you want to go fingerprint, go fingerprint. 0.2 seconds. Options are good. The camera is good. Maybe the best. Camera's good. Build quality is solid. It feels great. It just feels expensive. Wireless charge.
He very briefly touched on the 5T camera, not mentioning that it has the exact same lenses on both cameras, which I thought was weird. Exact same aperture too. So like two lenses that are identical on the 5T. The 10 having a telephoto lens and a wide angle capable of 4K at 60, 1080 at 240, portrait mode on the rear and front facing camera, optical image stabilization. There's a lot of advantages to the 10 camera, and he's just like, 5T, maybe? Yeah, the best, the best. Okay, all right, we'll pass by that.
Wireless charging. Finally, it's great. Using it in my car, using it beside the bed. I never charged it with a cable, not once.
Credit where credit is due, Lou participated in the portless challenge, which I am very proud of. Good job. It's nice, right? I love it. I love it. Anyway.
Weirdly though, because of how much this camera protrudes here, some wireless chargers make contact better than others. That camera hump rears its ugly head as well.
The camera hub is bad. I agree with that. It's not a reason to not buy the entire phone. And in fact, all 4 of the wireless chargers I use don't interact with the camera bump, so I don't see how that's a huge charging problem. It's not like it prohibits the phone from charging. It's just one of those little annoying things I hope they change in the future, but definitely does not ruin the product. Most people are using a case anyway.
The speaker, the second loudest speaker that I tested on a smartphone after the Razr phone.
If you looked very closely there, the iPhone 10 had a louder speaker rating than the Pixel 2. Just thought that was funny. I would bring that up. Anyway.
I want to give you the backstory on how I got to this phone as my daily driver. Galaxy S8, moved on to the S8 Active, bigger battery, to the Pixel 2 XL. Took the SIM and I put that into the Razr phone. My goodness, with the 120 hertz, yes, that's what it should look like. Comes at a cost because you're not getting an OLED display. I gotta have the OLED. I gotta have it.
And you're not getting a good camera, as we saw with MKBHD's review. And you're getting Gorilla Glass 3, kind of an outdated glass, and I'm sure that the Razr phone is not very durable at all. Missing wireless charging, missing included headphones, missing that bezel-less design he mentioned earlier, but we all know I don't like the Razr phone. Anyway, water resistance, too. Like, things we find standard on most 2017 smartphones, but anyway. I don't like this argument where it's like, this iPhone versus 5 other Android phones. iPhone has this feature. The 4th Android phone is better at that. iPhone has this feature. The first Android phone is better at that. It's like, okay, but they're not all in the same package.
But the problem is, when you're buying a device that's $1,000 plus, I'm not sure you're paying strictly for ambition. What you want is no excuses. I don't think you can have excuses at $1,000.
Okay, so this is what most of the rest of the video is about. It's all about the fact that the iPhone 10 is $1,000 and that's not worth it. The issue with talking about is it worth it is that it's entirely relative to what it is worth to a person. If someone makes $500 a month, clearly an iPhone 10 is a terrible investment. But if you're making closer to $5 grand a month or 10 grand a month, that's nearly nothing. And what you're looking for is the best product, not necessarily the best deal. If you're finding a device that is half the price of the best product, but with, 80, 90% of the good features, you're still gonna be like, oh, okay, that's great that it's cheaper, but I don't really mind paying extra if it allows me to be part of the greater ecosystem. And that's what we don't really see brought up on here at all. There's a reason, Lou, that people are okay with spending $1,000. Why don't we ever address the fact that so many people line up outside of Apple stores to spend over $1,000 on these phones, and sometimes multiple phones? And most of the time it's just because Apple's cheap. You're blindly loyal. It means you're stupid. Where I try to defend against that and say that no, there's a legitimate reason to not like Android. There's parts of it that most people aren't a fan of. They don't like that it doesn't have much third-party accessories that can match the Apple Watch, AirPods, iPad, airdropping features, stuff like that. They like it all working together, and we don't see that as much on Android. Where Android, you can get one phone that works really well, but it's hard to find an Android Wear watch that can compete with the Apple Watch, or a tablet that can compete with the iPad. And the way these products all work together is what makes them so doable. That's why people are okay with buying into these phones, even if they are more expensive. And do you honestly think that people didn't know that the iPhone 10 was more expensive? Think of those lines. Think of the customer demand, how crazy it's been, and how fast they're having to produce these things. Why do you think they're okay with that? Do you think they're just stupid and don't know that there's cheaper phones? I don't. I personally think that if you have an income high enough to afford an iPhone 10, you've been smart enough in life to at least figure out where you want to make investments, that you have a spare $1,000 to spend on a phone. It means that you're smart enough to make a decent wage, to make a decent living. So if you can't afford that, I'm not going to resort to the idea that you're just stupid, you're just dumb. If we were all just stupid and dumb, I think the cheapest smartphone developers would be winning this fight, but it's clear that the market does not prefer the cheapest product, they prefer the best product.
Because $1,000 now represents twice the price of something like the OnePlus 5T. I get an enormous number of notifications, probably 400 emails a day, but when I switched to this phone, I had exposure to the notification system that exists on here.
So I get this comment a lot about the notification system, and I think what the problem is people that are used to Android phones don't know how to set up notifications on iOS. This is the most common one I hear about. It's like, if I get 500 emails, it will all collapse into a single notification on Android, and I can tap it in to respond to each one individually. Whereas on iOS, it doesn't condense down, and there's a ton of emails that makes my lock screen packed. Casey Neistat talked about this as well. And while I think that would be a cool option, and keep in mind, iPhones actually get annual iOS updates. You don't have to wait 2 years for Android to change like the color of the control center. You actually get massive changes, so it's very possible iOS 12 could have that based on all the complaints people have made about it. But with all due respect, especially if you're talking about the OnePlus 5T, which likes to bypass the lock screen all the time, instead of being in the lock screen all the time and looking at all 500 individual notifications embedded into a single one, why not just open the app? I don't know about you, but I get like Twitter notifications all the time, so I don't have it set to my lock screen. If I want to check my Twitter notifications, I simply go to Twitter. Something iOS has had for a long time is badge app notifications, meaning that when you see the app, it will have in the corner the number of unread notifications. I think that's far more intuitive than just sparing a bunch of menus in your lock screen. A lock screen is meant for quick access, like getting a text message, you 3D touch on it and reply. I don't think it's meant for you to just spend there like browsing all of these notifications. Just open the app. At least that's how I do it. I'm sure you guys might disagree, but
this is a good phone. I think a lot of people would buy this thing and be happy with it. But that doesn't change the fact that I don't think that you should.
So what he just said basically was a lot of people could buy this and be happy with it, but because of its price point, it's not worth it, which I personally am having a hard time understanding, because it's like, if people want that phone, of course they're going to buy it. You know, all we're really doing as tech YouTubers, both Unbox Therapy and even me, are just recommending things. He's recommending you don't buy it. He obviously has no control over your wallet, neither do I. It's going to be your decision, and if you decide that you want the iPhone 10 and you can afford it, I don't see what the problem is with that. Whereas he's not recommending it because he's saying that there are other options out there that can do basically the same thing at half the price, which means that you should settle for a product that may not have as good as features or the features you care about, like iOS or the gesture control or being part of that Apple ecosystem. That doesn't matter because you can get a 5T for half the price. Now, I'm not trying to dock the OnePlus 5T. I think it's an incredible deal, and I think that's the best thing Android is for, because the reason so many people agree with Lou on this, and I don't blame them, is that talking about price points is the main weakness of Apple. I always say that they're the best product. I never try to make the argument that they're the best deal. There's a tweet I made about this on Twitter once, where I basically said you can boil down preferences to people who either prefer the better product or the better deal. Most are somewhere in the middle, but ultimately one overtakes the other. Though as we've seen in the smartphone industry, the better product is what people get excited for. And what I mean by that is that there will always be a phone cheaper than an iPhone. There will never be a time where the iPhone is the cheapest. But there's a reason people get the most excited for that. There's a reason we're talking about 2018 iPhone rumors in November, and no one's talking about Pixel 3 rumors. No one's talking about Galaxy Note 9 rumors. They're there, but they're incredibly less popular. There's a reason people are excited for changes coming to the iPhone, and it's because of those exclusives. It's because of those iMessage. It's because of that layout that's simpler and more aesthetically pleasing to a lot of people, and they are willing to pay extra for that, and I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Dual lens system with portrait mode. Fingerprint scanner that works in 0.2 seconds. Facial recognition, which works way faster than the iPhone. Dual SIM card tray instead of single. A headphone jack for the headphone lovers, because why not?
Why not is because Apple's trying to make a better product. They're trying to make something less of a hassle of dealing with headphones. They just want things to be wireless, and third-party companies are not going to make wireless headphones if phones keep making headphone jacks. There's just no reason to move on. If you ditch the headphone jack, you have reason to start making Bluetooth-enabled devices. There's a push to make the industry go forward. This is why Apple ditched the CD-ROM. It's why they ditched FireWire. It's why they ditched the floppy disk drive. If there's a bunch of floppy disk lovers out there, that doesn't mean you just keep including it, because why not? This is progress, okay? 5T is all about getting as many sales as physically possible. Apple's more about trying to move people to the next generation, even if they don't like it. They've had a history of removing very popular things, but ultimately, we're totally used to it now. Back when the iPad first came out, people said it would be a flop because it didn't have a USB port. Look at us now.
I've been showing this display to people. I put this display, and this display. Almost everybody picked the OnePlus display. These are all nice displays. The trouble is there's only one phone in here that's $1,000 and up. Only one.
And there's only one phone on there that's running iOS. There's only one phone in there that can be paired with an Apple Watch. There's only one phone in there that allows you to have iMessage, that allows you to text people over Wi-Fi even if you're on a plane. There's only one phone in there that can do 4K at 60. There's only one phone in there that has a Geekbench score with multi-core that goes over 10,000. There's only one phone in there made by Apple, and there's a reason that one is selling better than the rest.
The competition that exists is driving the price of better down. That's an essay just below 600 probably on Amazon. That's the OnePlus 5T, 500, and this on the far right is of course the Essential phone.
I love the Essential phone. If you're going Android and you're on a budget, that's a great phone. Please check it out. But by no means would I call it better than the iPhone 10. It is a better deal maybe if you're on a budget, but if we're just talking money's not a factor, you just want the best phone out there, I'm gonna say 10.
I know. In this audience right here, there are die-hard iOS users, and I respect that. And I know there's value there for you.
Thank you, Lou. I respect you too. Totally understand your opinion of trying to make phones with the best product by heavily bringing up the price point. That's a perfectly reasonable argument. Tons of my fans and friendly absolutely agree with you, and I'm glad that he took that moment to appreciate die-hard iOS lovers. I totally respect that.
I'm sitting here because you guys trust me to tell you what I'm thinking. I just can't tell you to buy this phone. My recommendation is to not buy the iPhone 10. If you look around, you will be amazed at what's happening at half the price.
I think that Unbox Therapy has a perfectly reasonable argument. While I disagree with the fact that it's not worth it to anyone, I clearly can agree that there are some people out there who should not buy it. People who are on a budget, and likely the reason Unbox Therapy is one of the largest tech channels out there is because most people who go to YouTube to see what kinds of options there are, what kind of budget phones there are, they're typically more caring about how cheap of a phone they can get for a good price. People who are into Apple, people who are into iOS and that ecosystem aren't really open to debate about it. So they're not going to YouTube for answers. They know what they're gonna buy and they're not gonna care about other people's opinion on it. That's why we see a very large popularity for the iPhone in Apple users, but we don't see that presence really made up on YouTube, except for, of course, this audience. But my overall opinion of his experience of making this his only phone is that he did not experience what most users who are buying the iPhone 10 are experiencing. Statistically, most people who buy Apple products own more than one. As we're seeing popularity in the Apple Watch grow, we're seeing AirPods, the most popular wireless headphones, and we're seeing growth in the iPad market, and we're seeing growth in the Mac user market. Yes, you can check me on that. It means that no Lou using his Windows machine and having a standard watch and trying to use audio jack headphones is not going to experience the same iPhone 10 experience as I am. When I'm using the iPhone 10, I'm recording 4K at 60 video that's optically stabilized. I can airdrop that to my MacBook and edit it in Final Cut Pro. If I'm jogging, if I'm running, I can leave the phone at home wirelessly charging and take calls and texts from my cellular Apple Watch. When I want a pair of headphones, I simply pull out my AirPods and plug them in, and it automatically starts working. Whereas what he's experiencing is pretty much just the flaws, because he's looking at all these other Android phones and saying, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have this. And those features are important to him. I totally get that, I understand it, and I don't believe he's lying. I don't think he's just biased against Apple or mad that Apple didn't send him an iPhone 10. Don't worry, Lou, they didn't send me one either. I think he genuinely doesn't like it, but what I disagree with is that it is not capable of being recommended to anyone. I think it is a perfectly good phone, an amazing phone, in fact, for people who want a massive change to their iPhone and want to have the best overall smartphone. The way it works with all the other tech, and the fact that it is going to get many iOS updates in the future that are going to visibly show alterations that Apple will make, whereas your Android phones are not going to, I can recommend it to that demographic. If you're on a budget, if you don't mind Android, you're okay with just using that, no problem at all. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.